The bank notification came at 6:47 in the morning. Nini was standing in her kitchen in Abuja, still wearing the oversized gray t-shirt she had slept in, waiting for her kettle to boil. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She picked it up the way you pick up something ordinary, casually, without expectation, the way a person does when they still believe their life is intact. She read the message once. Then she read it again. Debit alert. NGN 4,750,000. Available balance. NGN 12,300. 12,300 naira. In an account she had been building for 11 years. An account Jamal was never supposed to touch. The one she opened before they even married. The one she fed quietly every month from her analyst salary, skipping vacations, wearing shoes until they cracked, eating lunch at her desk so she could transfer the difference into that account every Friday without fail. 12,000 naira. She didn't scream. She didn't call Jamal. She didn't even sit down. She stood at that counter and stared at the kettle until it clicked off on its own. The steam curled upward and disappeared. She watched it go. Something inside her, something that had been holding a particular shape for 11 years, quietly released its form. She would later tell Aunt Lola that the worst part wasn't the money. The worst part was the realization that followed it, slow, unbearable, and precise, that the man sleeping in their bedroom down the hall had looked at her sacrifice and seen only an opportunity. She set her phone face down on the counter. She never made the tea. And in that kitchen, in that silence, everything that was about to happen began. Before we continue this story, let me ask you something quietly. Where are you listening from right now? And what time is it in your part of the world? Maybe you're hearing this under the hot afternoon sun. Maybe you're lying in bed, lights off, with nothing but your thoughts. Maybe it's early morning, and this story is the first voice you're hearing today. Different places, different lives, but one story, one lesson. If stories like this speak to your heart, take a second to subscribe to the channel. Your like helps this message reach another soul who might need it. Your comment tells me you truly understand the lesson. And when you share, you might be saving someone from making the same mistake. Now, take a deep breath. Let us continue. Nini was not a woman who complained easily. Those who knew her used the same words without coordinating, steady, precise, quietly formidable. She had grown up in Enugu in a household where her mother treated discipline as a form of love and silence, as a form of strength. That upbringing had shaped Nini into someone who processed pain the way she processed spreadsheets, methodically, privately, without performance. She did not wear her difficulties on her face. She filed them somewhere internal and kept moving. She had met Jamal 11 years ago at a corporate dinner in Lagos. He was in logistics, charming in the specific way that untested men are charming, effortlessly, without knowing the cost. He laughed from his chest. He asked questions and actually waited for the answers. He told her, on the night they met, that she was the most quietly interesting person in the room. Not the most beautiful, not the most impressive. Interesting. She had held that word carefully because no one had ever chosen that particular one for her before. They married after 14 months. Settled in Abuja. Built what looked, from the outside, like a composed and functioning life. What the outside could not see was the slow, undramatic erosion happening within it. Jamal's logistics company had plateaued early and never recovered its initial momentum. He blamed the economy. He blamed his business partners. He blamed fuel costs, government policy, Abuja traffic, everything with reliable consistency, except himself. Nini had watched all of this without comment, continuing to work her analyst job, continuing to carry the household's financial weight in ways she never announced, continuing to transfer money into her private savings account every Friday, the account she had opened before they even married, the one that existed entirely outside their joint finances, the one she thought of, privately, as her floor. The thing beneath her feet if everything else gave way. She had started noticing changes in Jamal around 8 months ago. Small things, the kind that register below conscious alarm. A different cologne on a Tuesday with no occasion for it. Phone calls he took in the car, windows up. A new restlessness in the evenings, a quality of distraction that felt outward-facing rather than inward. She had cataloged these observations in the quiet part of herself where she stored things she wasn't ready to examine and continued functioning normally, because that was what Nini did. Until the morning the alert arrived and functioning normally became impossible. She had gone to the bank that same morning, dressed calmly, drove herself, requested a full printed statement. The young banker produced it without ceremony, and she thanked him and walked to her car and sat in the car park reading every line in the morning heat with the engine off. 3 transfers. 6 weeks apart. The same recipient account each time. The amounts were not careless. They were deliberate, spaced to avoid triggering automated fraud alerts. Whoever had made them understood exactly how to move money without causing immediate noise. That understanding belonged to a man who worked in logistics, who understood supply chains and transaction flows, who had once borrowed her mobile token for an emergency and returned her phone with the screen already dark. 8 months ago. She sat with that. 8 months. 160-something evenings of dinner across a table. 160-something nights in the same bed. She had passed him salt. She had ironed his navy suit. She had asked about his meetings and listened to the answers and believed, in the way that people who love carefully believe, that she was participating in a mutual life. She opened Instagram in the car park and found Kira Naji in under 20 minutes. The account was public and confident. A beauty brand launch in Lagos, gleaming photographs, a ribbon-cutting ceremony, press coverage. Kira Skin by Naji. In one photograph near the edge of the frame stood a man in a navy suit. Nini had pressed herself, laughing the real laugh, the one she used to know. She put her phone in her bag, started the engine, drove home. She did not cry in the car. She would not cry until 2 weeks later, alone, with the shower running. That night she served Jamal dinner and watched him eat and said nothing. And beneath her stillness, something had already made a decision. Aunt Lola arrived on a Thursday with one small traveling bag and the particular energy of a woman who has decided something before she even boards the bus. She was 53 years old, compact in the way that purposeful people are compact, no excess, no waste. She had raised 3 children alone after her husband left, had buried her youngest sister, had sat with Nini through every hard season of her adult life, and had developed over those years a quality of presence that felt less like company and more like reinforcement. When Aunt Lola entered a room, the room rearranged itself around her without being asked. She sat across from Nini at the kitchen table and said nothing for the first few minutes. Just looked at her niece, at the careful stillness of her, the controlled posture, the eyes that had not been sleeping. Then she said quietly, "Show me everything." Nini showed her everything. She laid it out without emotion, the way she would present findings to a client, the printed bank statements, the transaction dates, the transfer amounts, the recipient account number that appeared 3 times with mechanical consistency. She showed her the Instagram page, the photographs, the launch event, the navy suit at the edge of the frame. Aunt Lola did not interrupt once. When Nini finished, she sat back in her chair and pressed her fingers together at the tips and stared at the table for a long moment. Then she said, "Does Mama Laje know any of this?" Nini shook her head. Aunt Lola looked up at her. "Then, that is where this begins." Now, Mama Laje was not a woman you called without preparing yourself first. 67 years old, retired from over 2 decades in international trade and distribution, she carried herself with the composed authority of someone who had sat across negotiating tables in Lagos, Accra, Nairobi, and Dubai and walked away from every one of them having surrendered nothing she intended to keep. She loved Jamal with the specific, costly love of a mother who had watched her son be given too much too easily and had worried quietly about what that would eventually produce. But she had loved Nini from the beginning with a different quality of love, steadier, less complicated by history. She had called Nini the architecture of this family at their wedding reception, and she had meant it structurally, not sentimentally. Aunt Lola made the call herself. She did not soften the information or approach it sideways. She told Mama Laje what Jamal had done, figure by figure, transfer by transfer, and then she stopped talking and waited. The line held 11 full seconds of silence. Then Mama Laje said, "Send me the bank records. Everything you have." Her voice carried no tremor. It was the voice of a woman converting shock directly into action, skipping the intermediate steps. She did not ask Aunt Lola to confirm. She did not say, "Are you sure?" She simply moved. She hung up without farewell. In Lagos, at almost the exact same hour, Kira Naji was having the finest evening of her professional life. Kira Skin by Naji had exceeded every projection she had made for its first quarter. A spread in a Lagos lifestyle publication had gone live that morning. A high-end department store in Victoria Island had confirmed a standing monthly order. Her Instagram had climbed past 42,000 followers on the back of a product review by an influencer whose endorsement cost as much as some people's monthly salaries. Kira stood in her apartment that evening with a glass of wine and looked at her phone screen and felt, with deep satisfaction, that the life she had always believed she deserved was finally becoming visible to other people. Jamal called at 9. He always called in the evenings, his voice carrying that low-grade anxiety she had grown accustomed to managing, questions about supplier timelines, inventory levels, contract confirmations. She answered his questions smoothly and efficiently because she understood that men who fund things need to feel that their funding is doing something. She did not love Jamal. She had never constructed that particular feeling for him and had never pretended otherwise to herself. He had appeared at a precise moment of need with access to capital and a hunger for significance, and she had recognized the combination immediately for what it was: useful. What she had never done was ask where the money came from. That is not a small omission. It is, in fact, everything. Because the money that stocked Kira Skin's first shipment, that paid the venue deposit, that covered the influencer fee and the press event catering and the branded packaging, that money had been saved, one Friday transfer at a time, by a woman in Abuja who ate lunch at her desk and skipped her own sister's wedding abroad because she could not afford the flight that particular month and would not touch her savings account to cover it. Kira Skin was built on that sacrifice, on that specific, private, accumulated discipline. And Kira Naji had accepted its benefits without a single question about its origin. Now, what neither Kira nor Jamal knew, what no one in the immediate circle of this unraveling had any reason to know, was that Kira Skin's entire product foundation rested on a single European cosmetic manufacturer called Derna Beauty. A Belgian house, mid-sized, with exceptional pigment technology and a growing interest in African market expansion. 18 months earlier, Derna Beauty had made a quiet but significant business decision to license exclusive African distribution rights across Nigeria, Ghana, Côte d'Ivoire, and Senegal to a private individual investor with proven regional trade experience. The contract had been signed without fanfare. The name on it, in clean and unhurried handwriting, was Doris Laje. Mama Laje had made that investment the way she made all her investments, from instinct sharpened by experience, without announcement, without consulting anyone, because she had learned across 25 years that the moment you discuss an opportunity is often the moment someone else takes it. She had told no one in the family because it was business, and she had always kept business in its own room with its own door.
She was looking at those contracts now.
Spread across her sitting room table in Port Harcourt, beside the bank records Aunt Lola had sent to her phone, she read the two documents in alternating silence. The contract. The transfers. The contract again. The name of the recipient account. She already knew, from one quiet phone call to a contact she trusted, exactly which registered business that account belonged to. She closed both folders. She poured herself a small glass of water and did not drink it. She sat in her chair in the quiet of her sitting room and remained completely still for a very long time, the way that people with genuine power sometimes go still, not from helplessness, but from the weight of knowing exactly what they are about to do, and taking one final moment before the doing of it becomes irreversible. Her housekeeper knocked at the door and asked about dinner. "Not tonight," Mama Laje said softly. The housekeeper withdrew. The house settled back into silence. Mama Laje reached for her phone and dialed her lawyer. The time was 10:43 in the evening. Outside, Port Harcourt hummed with its usual indifferent noise: generators, distant traffic, the ordinary sounds of a city that did not know that somewhere within it, a quiet woman had just decided to pull a thread that would unravel everything. Jamal found out about the distribution rights on a Saturday morning. It didn't come from Mama Laje. It came from Kira, who called him in a panic at 8:15 a.m., her voice stripped of its usual composure for the first time since he had known her. "The supplier pulled out," she said. "Der Nabiot. They sent a termination letter last night. Effective immediately. They said the exclusive distribution rights for Nigeria have been transferred to a private holder who has suspended all supply agreements pending review. Jamal, all my inventory orders. Everything that was supposed to ship next month. It's all frozen." Jamal sat up in bed. Nini was not beside him. She had been sleeping in the guest room for 5 days now, claiming fatigue, and he had accepted this without examination because Jamal had always been more comfortable with explanations that required nothing from him. "Which private holder?" he asked. Kira read the name from the letter. The sound Jamal made was not quite a word. It was something that started as a question and collapsed before it formed. Doris Laje. He dressed in 4 minutes. He drove to Port Harcourt without telling anyone where he was going, covering the 4-hour journey in silence, so complete that he arrived with no memory of the road. He pulled up to his mother's house at midday and found her sitting on the veranda, dressed immaculately, a cup of tea beside her that had gone cold. She looked at him the way you look at something you built, and then watched choose to be broken. "Sit down, Jamal," she said. "Mama." His voice came out younger than he intended. "The contracts. How long have you had those rights?" 14 months. He stared at her. "You knew?" "When Kira—" "I did not know anything about that woman until 4 days ago," Mama Laje said. Her tone was not raised. "It did not need to be. What I know now is sufficient." Jamal sat down heavily in the chair across from her. He tried the only strategy available to a man caught completely. He began to explain. He used words like complicated and difficult period, and I was going to tell you. He watched his mother's face as he spoke and saw nothing move in it, which was far more frightening than anger. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you know what Nini gave up to save that money?" He didn't answer. "Her sister's wedding in London," Mama Laje said. She couldn't afford the flight because she had transferred her travel savings that month. "She told me she was sick. She sat at home alone that weekend and sent a card." She paused. "I remember thinking it was strange. Now I understand." Jamal looked at his hands. "I have spoken to your father's brothers," Mama Laje continued. "I have spoken to my own sisters. There will be a family gathering next Saturday at this house. You will attend. You will bring nothing to say except the truth. Every detail, every figure, every month." She lifted her tea, remembered it was cold, set it down. "And you'll say it in front of everyone who watched me celebrate your wedding." "Mama." "The supply to that woman's business will not resume," she said, as if he hadn't spoken. "Ever. I have instructed my lawyer to make that permanent. Whatever money you put into it, whatever Nini's money built, it is gone. You cannot recover it. She cannot sell it. There is nothing there anymore." She looked at him directly. "You stole from your wife to build something I have now removed. I want you to sit with that." Jamal opened his mouth.
Closed it.
"Go home," his mother said. "Go home and look at what you have done to that woman's face. Look at it properly, for the first time. And then come to me next Saturday and tell the family what you saw." He drove back to Abuja in the same silence. He walked into the house. Nini was in the living room, reading, and she looked up when he came in. For the first time in perhaps years, he actually looked at her. Really looked at the tiredness around her eyes, the particular stillness she had been wearing for days, the way she held herself like someone bracing for an impact that had already happened. She looked back at him without expression. And he understood fully for the first time what he had done. It did not make him innocent. It only made him aware. The family gathering was not announced as a tribunal. Mama Laje had sent individual messages to each household, short, precise, offering no explanation beyond the date, the time, and the address. But everyone who received that message and knew Mama Laje understood something important. She did not call meetings without reason, and the absence of a reason in her message was itself the warning. People rearranged their weekends without being asked twice. They came from everywhere. Uncles from Port Harcourt who wore their seniority in their posture. Aunts from Lagos who arrived early and sat close to the front. Cousins who came carrying their own quiet curiosity, like hand luggage. Nini's people came too, Aunt Lola arriving first, as she always did, positioning herself in the front row of chairs arranged in Mama Laje's wide sitting room with the deliberate calm of a woman who has been waiting for this particular room for weeks. Nini sat beside her. She had dressed that morning with intention, not to perform strength, but because she had decided, standing in front of her mirror at 6 a.m., that she would not allow this room to receive a diminished version of her. She wore deep burgundy. Her hands rested steady in her lap. She had cried once in the past 2 weeks, alone in the guest bathroom at 2 a.m. with a shower running loud enough to cover the sound, and she had decided that was the one concession she would make to collapse. Everything else she had compressed into something harder, something with edges, something that could hold its shape under public weight. Jamal sat across the room. He had not slept properly in 4 days, and his body had begun to show it. A tightness around the jaw, a hollowness beneath the eyes, the particular stillness of a man who has run out of internal narrative. He had spent the drive from Abuja rehearsing words that kept dissolving before they formed into anything usable. By the time he sat down in his mother's sitting room and looked at the assembled faces of people who had danced at his wedding, he understood that no arrangement of words was going to function as shelter today. Mama Laje opened without ceremony. "My son took money that did not belong to him," she said. Her voice was level and clear, the voice of a woman who has already done her grieving in private and arrived here for something else entirely. He took it from his wife. "I'm going to ask him now to tell this family exactly how much, and how, and what he spent it on. And when he is finished, this family will decide together what kind of family we choose to be." The room absorbed this in silence. Jamal spoke. He had prepared nothing because preparation requires a version of events you can defend, and he had none. He delivered the truth in pieces, haltingly, without eye contact, dismantling himself in front of people who had respected him. The amounts. The timeline. The borrowed token. The 3 transfers made while Nini cooked dinner in the next room.
Kira's name.
The business. The launch event photographs. Each detail arrived in the room and settled differently on different faces, some hardening, some collapsing inward with something closer to sorrow than anger. Uncle Reuben, one of Jamal's father's older brothers, a man who had stood at the wedding reception and spoken about the responsibility of a husband with the authority of someone who believed every word, rose from his chair midway through Jamal's account, walked to the window, and stood there with his back to the room. He did not return to his seat. He remained at that window for the rest of it, looking out at nothing, and his silence was its own verdict. When Jamal finished, Aunt Lola spoke. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She said, "That money took Nini 11 years to save. She told me once, and I remember the exact words she used. She said, 'I never want to be in a position where I have to beg anyone, including my husband, to take care of myself.' She saved that money out of fear. Careful, private, disciplined fear. And he found it, and he emptied it, and he handed it to another woman to build herself a public life." She paused and let that land fully before continuing. "I want every person in this room to understand precisely what that says about how he valued his wife." The room did not recover from that sentence. What followed was not argument or raised voices. It was something quieter and more permanent, the measured, collective withdrawal of people who had extended trust to a man and were now, publicly and without apology, taking it back. Uncle Reuben did not turn from the window. 2 of the aunts said they were taking Nini home with them for a month. His cousin Marcus, who had been his closest friend since childhood and had served as his groomsman, sat at the back of the room and did not look at Jamal once during the entire proceeding. Mama Laje spoke last. She waited until the room had fully quieted. Then she said, "Nini is my daughter." Her voice held on that word, daughter, for just a fraction of a second longer than the rest, a barely perceptible pause that was the only public evidence of what this had cost her. "She was my daughter before she married my son." She remains my daughter now. That does not change. She turned to face Jamal directly. You are still my child. I will not stop being your mother. But what you are to this family, the trust you carried, the position you held, the assumption that your word meant something, that is gone. You will rebuild it from nothing if you are capable of it. I will not assist you. And I will not pretend that what you did was smaller than it was. Jamal looked at his mother. He had braced for anger. Anger was survivable. It had a shape, a duration, an eventual end. What he saw in Mama Laje's face was not anger. It was grief. Her grief. About him. Because of him. The grief of a mother who had believed in her son and was now sitting in her own sitting room, surrounded by family, publicly accounting for the consequences of that belief. That expression reached somewhere in him that nothing else had reached all week. He looked down at his hands. They were the hands of a man who had taken something irreplaceable from someone who trusted him completely, and there was nothing in them now. No explanation, no restitution, no version of himself he could present to this room that was adequate. The gathering ended without resolution because some things do not resolve. They simply become the new truth that everyone carries forward. Jamal drove back to Abuja alone. The road was long, and the silence in the car was the loudest thing he had ever sat inside. 3 months passed. Kira Naji's Kiriskin quietly folded. Without Durnal Buta's supply chain, she had no product line to sustain. She attempted to source alternatives, but the exclusive rights Mama Laje held blocked every comparable European supplier from engaging with Nigerian distributors in her category. Within 8 weeks, the press features went quiet. The Instagram page went from daily posts to nothing. The department store canceled its order. The venue she had rented for her second launch event kept her deposit. She did not contact Jamal again after the supply was cut. She had always been precise about when a vehicle had stalled. She simply moved on, the way people do when they have always treated others as means rather than ends, without ceremony, without acknowledgement of the damage left behind. She would rebuild elsewhere, perhaps. That was not the story. She was never the story center. She was only the occasion for it. Jamal moved out of the Abuja house in the 2nd month. He had not been asked to leave. Nini had not ordered him out, had not thrown his clothes into the street, had not performed the departure. She had simply made the house so completely and quietly her own that his presence in it felt increasingly like trespassing. He packed over 2 weekends and left without a scene. His logistics company, which Mama Laje had been quietly co-financing through a third-party arrangement he had never been made aware of, lost that backing the week after the family gathering. Without it, 2 of his 3 contracts became impossible to service. He scaled down, then down again. He was not destitute, that is not the lesson, but he was reduced, in ways that were specific and irreversible, to exactly the scale of a man who had spent years being bigger than what he had built. He called Mama Laje twice. She answered both times and spoke to him briefly, and without coldness, but without the particular warmth that had always been his inheritance from her. He understood that warmth was not gone because she had stopped loving him. It was gone because love and trust are not the same structure, and he had damaged the second without her permission. He did not call Nini. He had tried once in the 1st week, and she had picked up and waited, and he had found that he had nothing to say that was adequate. Not nothing to say, he had words. He had apologies arranged in careful order. But he understood, standing in his new rented flat holding his phone, that adequacy was not available to him. The gap between what he had done and what any apology could reach was not crossable. He hung up. She did not call back. Nini Obesai filed for the annulment 4 months after the bank notification. The process was handled through a lawyer Mama Laje recommended and partially funded, which was its own kind of statement. Aunt Lola stayed with her through the 1st month and then returned to Enugu, but called every evening at 7, a ritual that had never existed before and now existed permanently. The money was largely unrecoverable. Some of it, traced through the business accounts, was partially returned through a family agreement brokered by Uncle Reuben, who despite everything had a sense of structural justice. A portion, not all. The rest lived in the inventory of a collapsed business and the pockets of a supply chain that no longer existed. Nini filed it under loss and moved forward, because she was a financial analyst and she understood that some write-offs are not recoverable and the only productive response is accurate accounting and revised projections. She returned to work. She opened a new account at a different bank on a Friday, the same day she had always transferred her savings, and she made the first deposit herself, standing at the counter, and felt something she hadn't felt in months. Not happiness. Not yet. Something quieter. The particular sensation of a person who has been removed from their own life and is now, carefully, returning to it. Mama Laje called her the evening the annulment was finalized. "Are you all right?" she asked. Nini thought about it honestly. "I will be," she said. "Yes," said Mama Laje. "You will." A pause. "I want you to know, what he did was not a reflection of your value. Men who take from women who trust them are not taking from weakness. They are taking from strength, because strength is the only thing worth stealing." Another pause. "He found the most valuable thing in that marriage, and he spent it. That is his judgment, not yours." Nini sat with that for a long moment. "Thank you, Mama," she said. She had not planned to call her that. It came out simply, the way true things do, without announcement, without ceremony. Mama Laje didn't respond immediately. When she did, her voice had the particular texture of someone controlling something large. "Go and rest," she said softly. "You have worked enough for 1 year." There is a particular kind of cruelty that does not announce itself. It does not arrive with raised hands or loud voices. It arrives quietly, in the form of borrowed phone tokens and missing bank alerts, in the form of a man eating dinner across from a woman he is systematically emptying. Jamal did not think of himself as a cruel man. That is perhaps the most important thing to understand about him, and about the many men who resemble him. He thought of himself as a man managing competing needs. He had found a way to want two things and had simply reached for both without calculating the cost to either, because the one paying the cost was not the one he had to face directly in the morning. What he did not calculate was the architecture of the world he operated in. He did not calculate that his wife had been building something for 11 years with a discipline he had never understood. He did not calculate that the woman he had dismissed as his mother's old-world sentimentality was, in fact, the silent financial foundation of his professional existence. He did not calculate that loyalty, when it is real, builds structures, and that structures, when betrayed, do not simply disappear. They redirect. Kira Naji lost a business. But she was never innocent of what she was participating in. The money that built her empire was stolen, and she did not ask where it came from, because people who use others as instruments rarely interrogate the instrument's history. Nini lost 11 years of saved money. She did not lose herself, though she came close. She lost the particular safety of believing that the person sleeping beside her was operating in good faith. That safety, once gone, does not fully return. It reconfigures. It becomes vigilance, and eventually, it becomes wisdom, though no one chooses wisdom over safety if given the option. The lesson is not that men like Jamal always face consequences. Sometimes they do not. Sometimes they move on, and the woman is left to rebuild alone in silence while he constructs a new story in which he is still the protagonist. But sometimes, when the world is arranged just so, when the people surrounding a situation have integrity and the willingness to use it, sometimes the thing a man builds on stolen ground simply gets called back to the ground it came from. And the man is left standing on nothing, looking at his hands, finally understanding what he held and chose to spend. That understanding is not redemption. Redemption requires action, sustained and costly. What Jamal had at the end of this story was awareness. Whether he converts it into something worthy, that is a chapter not yet written. But for Nini, the chapter that matters is already open. And she is writing it herself. Thank you for staying with me to the end. Comment your thoughts on the betrayal, and tell me where you are watching from. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more gripping stories like this. What do you think happens next? Comment below.